Mercedes has got it wrong. Again. The dominant team of 2014 to 2021 may have fixed last year's troubles with porpoising and bouncing, but it has a new problem in 2023. It's just slow. In Bahrain, it had the fourth fastest car, with a very similar deficit to the pace as it did this time 12 months ago. Lewis Hamilton, who finished 5th in the race, 51 seconds behind winner Max Verstappen, came away from the weekend bemoaning a lack of downforce. And in F1, downforce is performance. But the problem isn't simply that the car is off front-running pace, which is bad enough. It's also that Mercedes' poor start to this season has proved that its car concept genuinely is a problem. And while there are upgrades coming with a package promised for race 6 at Imola at the end of May, all evidence points to this not being enough to turn around the fortunes of Mercedes. This means that if it's going to deliver on its objective of getting into championship contention this year, it's going to need to respond quickly and decisively. The question is, while it recognises drastic action is required, does Mercedes know what direction to turn in? The problems Mercedes had last season have been talked about endlessly, so we won't revisit them in depth here. The short version is that it created a car that produced enormous downforce levels, but only when running closely to the ground and in a very specific window. It couldn't run there thanks to the porpoising problems, suffered with rough ride because of the stiffness of its suspension, and despite doing a good job to recover and win the Brazilian Grand Prix, it was always a case of making the best of it and fixing the fundamental problem with the new car for 2023. Mercedes has ticked that box. While there were question marks about whether its car concept, specifically the very visible zero sidepod design, was causing the bouncing and porpoising, Mercedes largely stuck with this. It did make some changes, slightly widening the side pods in the middle and repackaging the underbody parts, but it continues to stand alone with the look of its car. The trouble is, compared to the closing stages of last season, the deficit to Red Bull has, according to Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff, doubled, if not tripled. There were rumours during the winter that Mercedes wasn't producing the numbers it needed, although Wolff has said it hit its targets. Pre-season testing suggested Mercedes was not at the level it needed to be, but the team remained cautious and waited until qualifying to lay bare the extent of its problems before admitting where it really was. Wolff said at the launch that the car would eventually be competitive enough to fight at the very front, but after qualifying, he admitted this package will not do that. The problem Mercedes has got is a straightforward one. It simply does not have enough downforce. Wolff pointed to time lost in the quicker corners from turn 5 to 7 as key to its deficit, with the performance on the straights and through the other turns described as OK. This weakness in particular manifests itself at the rear of the car. As we observed during testing, rear instability and a weakness in terms of traction is a problem for Mercedes. And despite making a big step forward overnight after a torrid first day of practice in Bahrain, at least delaying Lewis Hamilton's fears that Mercedes might not have the pace to reach Q3, this is going to be an ongoing problem. As Hamilton pointed out, this means not only a pace deficit in qualifying trim, but also accelerated tyre degradation on race stints. Mercedes introduced an upgrade for Bahrain with a lower downforce rear wing being used both by Russell and Hamilton. This helped to ensure Mercedes was strong on the straights, behind only Ferrari and Red Bull in the main speed trap in Bahrain qualifying. But it's going to take a lot more than that for Mercedes to turn things around. And it is potentially going to require some big changes to the car concept to unlock the required performance. Toto Wolff made it crystal clear after qualifying that simply developing the existing car concept is not an option. He talked about the need to embark on untreaded paths as it seeks a new development direction. He stressed that his concerns about the car's ability to emerge as a genuine front-runner apply not only to the car as it is on track right now, but also the version currently in the wind tunnel in Brackley. So any upgrades in the pipeline are not enough. So this could mean a big change of concept, but how dramatic a change that would be is another matter. Mercedes doesn't have the time or resources under F1's cost cap to produce a completely new car, so what this means is a change of aero concept around the existing architecture. Which brings us to the most popular talking point over the past 12 months for Mercedes, its side pods. It's important to remember that Mercedes consistently said the narrow side pods weren't the source of its problems last year. The fact it's continued with an evolution of that side pod geometry and not had porpoising or bouncing problems supports that. But this doesn't mean the design isn't connected to this year's problem of a downforce deficit. Having hinted during the launch that there would be visibly different side pods coming as part of the Imola package, it's clear this is an area that has been earmarked for change. However, it won't be a revolution, with technical director Mike Elliott describing what's coming as different bodywork that won't be the same as other people's and won't be the same as what we've got, but it'll be different. The race understands that Mercedes has run alternative designs in the wind tunnel and CFD that are closer to that used by Red Bull, but found no performance gain. Hence, it has stuck with its existing concept. Elliott confirms that plenty of solutions have been evaluated, but that the current one favours us. The question is whether it's the right long-term solution. But simply changing the side pods is likely too easy an answer. The key to the concept of a modern F1 car is the way the underfloor works, which also includes how the floor edges, raised this year by 15mm remember, interact with that. And of course, the side pods also play a part in that system. The question now is whether Mercedes has the necessary tools to choose the right path. Changing direction is easy enough, but identifying the correct way to go is the difficult part, especially as such a change may mean a short-term performance loss, even though it unlocks significantly more long-term pace. So unless it has a clear understanding of why such a change of direction would be more effective, there's a risk it will not be able to find the expected performance gains. Meanwhile, it has a development pathway that it has already advanced further down with than the car that is currently on track that will deliver additional performance. So does Mercedes keep pushing in that direction, or recognise that the potential is not there to make big enough gains? The package expected for Imola will give a performance gain, but this will not be big enough to eliminate the gap to Red Bull, even if the RB19 stands still in terms of development. And while there is still more to extract from the current specification, as proved by the unexpectedly big step Mercedes took from Friday to Saturday in Bahrain, in particular in the quicker corners, the ultimate potential appears lacking. Wolff's words suggest that Mercedes needs to change direction significantly. The question is whether it can pick the right direction and, if it does, how long it will take to produce the necessary performance while chasing down a pace-setting Red Bull team that has been treading that path for far longer. What's more, there's also a question of how big a change really is needed, given that despite its shortcomings, the Mercedes is still not that far off the pace. Change for change's sake is not the right strategy, it must be driven by sound reasoning and science. Last season, Mercedes had a fundamental problem with porpoising and bouncing to fix. That was easy to identify and difficult to solve. Finding the right path to gaining more downforce and avoiding the temptation to change direction too wildly might prove even more difficult. So what now? Well, firstly, it's important to note that Mercedes didn't suddenly realise it was in trouble during the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend. We asked Wolff about that on Sunday night in Bahrain, and he stressed that different concepts are already being evaluated. What's clear is that having been wedded to the current car concept, it's time to, as Wolff put it, change the perspective technically. So what does that mean for 2023? Well, realistically, while it's too early to write Mercedes off completely, it's difficult to imagine it can turn around such a dramatic overhaul of the car and then develop it to be a Red Bull beater in a timescale compatible with fighting for the championship. The team has dropped a few hints already indicating that effectively sacrificing this season to ensure it's on the money for 2024 is also a possibility. Russell has alluded to this course of action, while Wolff said the important thing is to correct its problems because there's another 3 years of the regulations to go. To add to its woes, Aston Martin, which uses the Mercedes wind tunnel, power unit, gearbox and rear suspension, had the second best car in Bahrain, with Fernando Alonso finishing third. And while Wolff focuses on the deficit to Red Bull, Aston Martin's form is proof that going in a more conventional direction can deliver more performance. Plus, it shows the mechanical platform is fundamentally sound. So the question now is how quickly Mercedes can turn it around and how will it achieve that? Last year, it had a specific problem to troubleshoot, but this year, it's just fallen short in what might be called the normal process of car design and development. Instead, the problem lies somewhere in its design process in Brackley. Mercedes must find that weakness, fix it, and then outdevelop Red Bull to have any chance of bouncing back this year. As Wolff himself says, silver bullets don't exist in 21st century F1, but Mercedes needs to find one. For a more in-depth look at how Aston Martin embarrassed Mercedes and several other frontrunners in Bahrain, check out this video.